What's happening, people? I'm DJ Graish, and today we're making a drum and bass tune with a hip hop intro.
Keep it real if you ain't supporting the real.
So today we're going to be making a bit of a boom bap hip hop intro. We're going to be adding Method Man as the vocal sample just to give it that hip hop flavour, and then it's going to drop into drum and bass. So let's go. The first thing I'm going to do is just change the BPM to 174, which is a bit of a typical drum and bass tempo. And I'm just going to delete these unwanted tracks and leave myself with one MIDI track. Next, I'll drag a drum rack onto the MIDI track. The drum rack is the place where we're going to put all of our drum samples and build up a bit of a drum kit so that we can make our DNB drums. So the first one I'm going to drag in there is this kick. I usually like to turn off snapping. So the next sample I'm going to choose is this snare, and again I'll turn off snapping. Now with the percussion, I've got this one sample that contains 4 sounds, so I'll drag it to the first pad and adjust the start and end point so that I've just got the first sound within the sample. Now I'm going to just hold down Alt and drag the sample to another one of the pads of the drum rack, and adjust the start and end point again to choose the second sound within the sample, and then just do that again for the third and fourth sounds. So now I've got, essentially it's one sample, but I'm playing 4 different sounds within that sample, and some of them might be at the wrong volume, so I'm just going to open up this mixer section and just adjust the levels. Now I'm going to create a MIDI clip, so just highlight one bar and hold down Shift and Command and press M. That creates a MIDI clip where you'll be able to draw in notes for the different drum hits of our drums. So, firstly, I'm just going to start with the classic drum and bass pattern, so that's the kick here and the snare here. Now it's time to program in the percussion parts. So now that the percussion parts are all at the right volume, I think it's time to add a little bit of compression. So I like to use this glue compressor, and usually for drums it's good to have a slow attack, a fast release, and for these drums I'm just going to choose a 2:1 ratio, which means it's not really compressing that much. Another classic effect which you can drag onto your drums is the drum bus. Now when you're using the drum bus, by default it actually makes your drums a little bit louder, so there is this trim function. So what you can do is have a look at the level of your drums before, and then turn on the drum bus, have a look at them after, and then use the trim to adjust it so that it's what we call gain matched, meaning it's the same volume before and after. Another thing that I've been adding to my drums recently is tape saturation, and I have found the most amazing free tape saturator from a company called Windows. So the plugin is called To Tape, and this is version 8, so I'm just going to drag To Tape 8 onto the drums and max out the input, which is going to give it some nice warm saturation. And again, I'm just going to turn down the output volume to gain match it so that the drums are still the same volume after as they were before. So far, all our drums are on one track, which made it really easy to program them within one MIDI clip. But now that that's done, it is actually better to have them all on separate tracks. So how do we do that? Well, you just need to go to this mixer view and open it up here so that you see all the individual drums, and then you can just drag each one of them over here to the right, and it just puts it onto its own track, which is amazing. So once you've done that for each one of them, and they're all out of the drum rack and onto their own separate tracks, you can just select them all. So select the first one, hold down Shift, select the last one, and now they're all highlighted. You can press Command and G to group them together, and just make sure all of those effects that we put on, like the compression, the drum bus, the tape saturation, make sure they're all there onto the drums group, and that's how you can separate them all into their own individual tracks, which means you'll have sends. It means you can send them to a room reverb, which I'm going to show you in a minute. And, you know, you can just process them all individually. Now that we've got our drums sorted, it's time to move on to the sample. The sample I'm going to be using for this tune is these lo-fi chords, so I'll just drag those in. And I usually like to put the time stretching algorithm to complex. I'm also just going to pitch it up by 1 semitone. And luckily for me, this lo-fi sample pack also has the MIDI for the chords. So I'm just going to drag in the MIDI clip as well. And I usually like to use a Rhodes piano to make some basic chords underneath. So anyone who's seen my channel before will know that my favourite Rhodes piano is one by Native Instruments, called the Scarby Mark I. So that's a part of Contact. So I'll just drag Contact onto this channel and choose the Scarby Mark I. I'm just going to edit the MIDI in here so that we get rid of the little melody bits and it's just these 2 long chords. And there are these 2 really low notes which I'm not going to include within the chords, but what you can do is just cut those. So select them both and press Command and X to cut them, and you can create a sub bass layer. The one I like to use is this basic sine sub. So just drag that in, create a MIDI clip and just paste those notes there, and that's just going to give you the weighty sub bass underneath the chords. And don't forget that I did pitch up the sample by 1 semitone, so I'm just going to move the sub bass and the chords notes up by 1 semitone so that everything's playing in the same key. Before we go any further, I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who's subscribed to the channel so far. I did have a goal of hitting 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I achieved it by October, and I couldn't have done it without you guys, obviously. So thank you so much for subscribing, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more tutorials coming soon. And without further ado, back to the video. In addition to our basic sine sub, I'm also going to be using an 808. So the first thing to do is to drag a simpler into the project and choose your favorite 808 sample. Now, you've probably seen in a previous video that I like to tune my 808 sample to C, and since I've used this particular sample a million times, I know exactly how to do that. That's +6 semitones and then +46 on the detune. You know, if you happen to be using a new 808 sample and you don't know the pitch of it, just put a tuner and play a C on your keyboard and then tune it so that it says C on the tuner. Before I draw in the notes, I'm just going to add the saturation so that we can hear the notes really clearly and make sure we're drawing in the right notes. So just adjust the saturator to the right amount and draw in the notes for the 808. I'm just going to adjust the start point of the 808 to get rid of the knock of the kick so that it is literally just a sine sub. So I like to just move the start point a couple of cycles over around here and then just turn up the attack as well so that each time the 808 kicks, it's not really a kick sound anymore, it's literally just a sub bass. Now that we've got bass in our track, it's going to be a good idea to EQ some of the other elements and take out the low end so that they play well together. So I'm just going to add an EQ8 to our sample and roll it off and take out all of that bass. And you can just select the two bass parts and then press Command and G to group them together and call it bass. And we can just group these other instruments together into their own little instrument group. The next thing I'm going to do is set up a room reverb. So by default, Ableton Live has a reverb unit on return track A, which I'm going to use. The thing is that it's by default, it's got quite a long decay time. When it comes to a room, usually the decay time is, you know, if there's plenty of furniture in the room and stuff like that, then it's just a short decay time under 1 second, you know. So what I like to do is to put it under half a second, usually 400 and something milliseconds. And then I also like to put an EQ8 before the reverb unit and make sure that no bass at all is being sent to that reverb unit. And now you can just go back to your mixer view and turn up Send A on a lot of these channels, almost all of them except for any that have a lot of bass, which is the kick and the bass layers. So all of the other drums like the percussion, the snare, the sample, the Rhodes piano, all of those can be sent to this room reverb, and what that does is creates a space and makes it sound like all these instruments are playing in the same room. Speaking about instruments, I'm going to add another instrument now, and that's some strings. So I'm just going to type in strings and find myself a nice strings instrument in Ableton Live. And I'm just going to create a MIDI clip by highlighting a section, Shift Command and M to create a MIDI clip, and draw in some notes. So one thing you can do, if you decide that you don't like that instrument, you can just drag other instruments over the top of it and it will just replace it and use those MIDI notes, so you can just keep auditioning different instruments until you find one that you like. I found an amazing vocal sample and I can't believe how well this works with the tune. I just went having a little look in a folder I've got, which is Motown Acapellas, and literally just flicking through one of the first acapellas that I clicked on, and I just clicked to halfway through the tune, and I heard Smokey Robinson making this sound. So I'm just going to turn off warping and turn down the sample to the right level, and just move it, experiment with it in different places within the loop and see where it sounds good. So I think it's going to sound good here, but I'm going to need to make this an 8-bar loop to accommodate Smokey. And I'm just going to turn up Send A so that it gets sent to our room reverb. Alright, so it's time for us to make the hip-hop drums for the intro. I'm just going to duplicate everything so that we've got twice as much, and then I'll just delete the drums from the first half. And it's time for us to find some hip-hop drums. I'm going to use this drum loop, but I'm actually going to chop it up and just use bits of it. So the first thing I usually do when dragging any sample in is just turn it down to an appropriate level and turn off warping. So I'll just chop up the sample and make sure I've got the kick and the snare individually so that I can make my own pattern out of them. I'm also going to need a hi-hat, and I'm actually going to be using this sample, which is actually a ride cymbal, but I'm going to be using it as a closed hat and an open hat. So I'll just make a bit of a pattern with that. And when making hip-hop drums, it's good to move some of the hats off the grid a little bit and make a bit of swing or groove to it. So what I'm going to do is put the first hat of every bar on grid and then the other three slightly swung, and that's going to give it a bit of a groove. And of course I'm going to turn up send A so that our hi-hats get sent to the room reverb. And now that I've created a bit of a pattern with the kick and the snare, I'm actually going to create another track and just put the snare on that so that we've got separate tracks for the kick, snare and the hi-hat. Now we can group these all together and just call it intro drums. And I'll just adjust the levels and do a bit of a little mix of the intro drums to get them all to the right level. So let's take a listen. I think the kick needs to be a bit more interesting, so I'm just going to duplicate some of these kicks and make like a double kick that you always hear in boom bap style hip hop. Now the trick to doing this is to not do it on grid basically, so you have to do it with freeform timing. So in this case it's kind of a quick one, like ba-bump, you know what I mean? I'm just going to adjust these hi-hats so that the ones that play with the kicks and snares are slightly quieter and the ones that play on their own are slightly louder. And for the processing on the intro drums, we're going to start with a glue compressor, and again it's going to have a slow attack, fast release and a 2:1 ratio. And I'm going to be using the drum bus again, and just make sure you turn the trim down to gain match it. Turn up the drive a little bit, and in this case I'm going to be using it on the hardest setting. I'm going to use an EQ8 to take out some sub bass. When you're making an intro to a drum and bass tune, obviously it needs to have less bass, it needs to be thinner, and it needs to allow the drop to be the one with the bass and have the most impact and everything. So for that reason, I am going to roll off a lot of the sub bass of the kick of this intro hip hop drums section. And I'm going to add the tape saturator that I was talking about before from Air Windows, so it's 2 tape 8, and I'm just going to max out the input gain so that we get some lovely tape saturation. You may have heard people going on about sidechain compression as a way to make your kick and bass play nicely together. So what is sidechain compression? Well, it's a way of making the bass duck down every time the kick hits. So how do we do this? First of all, you need to drag a compressor onto the bass group. So in the compressor, there's this little arrow that you can click that opens up more options, and there you'll see the sidechain option. So the sidechain needs an input. The way it works is, instead of the sound itself triggering above the threshold and engaging the compressor, it's actually going to be this other sound that's going to be triggering the compressor. In this case, we're going to choose the kick. So every time the kick goes above the threshold, the compressor is going to engage and duck down. And this is actually the same effect that they use on radio shows. So whenever the presenter says something on the mic, the music ducks down. You may have noticed that all of the tracks in this project are the same colour so far. And usually I have it on auto colour, but for whatever reason I turn that off and everything's blue. So let's do something about that. So to change the colour, all you need to do is right click each group and you'll see all the colours there. And what you can do is select a load of tracks together. So select the first one, hold down shift and select the last one. Now you've selected a load of tracks and you can right click and choose a colour. You can also do that with MIDI clips and audio clips as well. So the time has come for us to do our arrangement, and this is the part where I usually do a bit of a time lapse and fast forward it because it takes forever, but in today's episode I'm actually going to show you the arranging process. So first thing I'm going to do is just double this intro and make it 16 bars long. So we're going to need to have something happen before the drop. So I'm just going to create a little 1 bar gap here before the drop. So I'm going to be putting a bit of delay on a couple of the instruments before the drop. So I'm just going to adjust the delay unit that's on return track B so that I can automate the sends of certain instruments and send them to that delay unit just before the drop. So I'm going to be doing that for the instruments group, but also for the kick. So all you need to do is just grab this pen tool. Make sure you're in automation mode, which is you just press A on your keyboard. It'll take you into automation mode. You can grab the pencil tool and just that will allow you to adjust this red line. So make sure you go to Mixer and Send B, and that'll show you the red line, which corresponds to the send knob B. And the red line, basically, if you draw in these bits that go up, it's like it's opening it for a second and closing it down again, you know? At the end of each 16 bar section, I usually like to make something happen, whether that's a bit of a different break coming in, you know, or you can just program a little fill. So I'm just going to duplicate these kicks and snares into a little bit of a fill just for the 1 bar at the end of a 16 bar section. And I'm also going to do the same for the percussion layer so that some hats kind of go along with the kicks and snares and create that little fill. I'm just going to duplicate these 16 bars. So after the drop, it's just drums and bass and this Rhodes, and then the next 16, the sample's going to come back in. And this violin part that we made is actually going to be for the third 16, so I'll just move that over. And the second section that's got the main sample, we're also going to put Smokey there. I've noticed this 808 is kind of peaking a bit too much, so I'll just compress it a bit. And that little 1 bar section at the end of each 16 where it's a fill, I'm just going to cut out the instruments just to emphasize it a bit. So for this little fill at the end of the section, I might just try a kick roll, so I'll just duplicate the kick. Now I want to make this intro twice as long, so how do we do that? I just need to highlight this 8 bar section and hold down Shift and Command and press D to duplicate, and that not only duplicates it, but it just sort of shifts everything along and makes space for that new bit. So now we've got a 32 bar intro. I want to experiment with some different Rhodes sounds. So I'm just going to cycle through. If you have a sound that you like, but then you want to do a bit of experimentation, you can just duplicate the whole channel and just mute that one and then work on this new one, change it to a whole different sound, and then later on you can alternate between the two. So on the drop, obviously you want it to be drums and bass, but if it's just drums and bass, you might end up with a bit of a hole in the frequency spectrum where there's not really much going on in the mid-range. So you don't really want some big instrument that's drawing attention to itself. What I like to do is either use a pad or just like filter out an instrument. So I'm going to be using this Rhodes, but I'm just going to filter out the low end and the high end and just have it this sort of concentrated mid-range sound. One thing you can do when you want to add a load of effects to something and you want to check the before and after, you can just group together all of the effects. So you just select the first one, hold down shift, select the last one, Command and G to group them all together into an effects group, and then you've just got one on and off button that you can turn on and off and listen to the difference. If it sounds better with it, then you've cracked it, and if it doesn't, you can either adjust them or just delete them and start again. So with the bass, obviously we've got some saturation on there, which is adding some harmonics and giving us a bit more of a mid or low mids to add to the bass, so it's not just a pure sine wave. Well, one thing I like to do is separate these so that you've got the pure sine wave on one channel, and then you've got another channel which I call mid bass. So what I like to do is duplicate the sub bass layer and then turn off the distortion on the original sub, and then on the duplicated version you can turn it up a bit, you can distort the hell out of it, you can add overdrive, you know. And one thing you want to do is just add an EQ8 with a really steep EQ and just roll off all of the sub bass from this duplicated layer and make sure it is just mid-range. Now, when I added the overdrive, there was something weird happening at the end of the note. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to freeze and then flatten this track to turn it into audio, and then I'm just going to slice it and then use the fade out function to get rid of that weird bit at the end. And I'm also going to do the same exact process with the 808 track. You know, so I'll make one pure 808 and then the other one is going to be the saturated 808, which I'm going to add all sorts of different types of distortion, and make sure you add an EQ8 with a really steep EQ, taking out all of that sub bass. And lastly, just adjust the levels of the sub bass and the mid bass and get them working well together. So another thing that I need to do with this tune is add some stereo width to it. So you can do that with panning, but you can also do that with a tool called a stereo widener. The one I've been using recently is the Isotope Ozone Imager. So I'll just put that onto certain tracks, and all you need to do is click this button that says Stereoize, and then you can just turn up the width. Now this is a multi-band imager, so you can select, you can create different bands for the mid-range and the highs of different things if you want. But if by default there's just one big band, right? So if you're putting it onto individual tracks within your project, then you can just leave it on one band mode and then just turn up the width of the whole thing. I want to make the bass a bit more interesting, so I'm going to create this sort of wow effect. So it's going to be wow. So I'm going to put this low pass filter. I want to make the bass a bit more interesting, so I'm going to use this wow effect. So the way I'm going to do that is just put a auto filter after the bass, the mid bass layer, and draw in some automation to make the low pass filter sort of open up and then close down again. And with the sub bass layer, I'm going to use the exact same automation curve, but in this case I'm going to do it for the amplitude. So I'll just use a utility and automate the gain to open up and close down again, and that's going to create the low end of the wow bass. The other day I was on Instagram and I was scrolling away, and I saw the most amazing vocal sample from Method Man and Old Dirty Bastard. So I've recorded it into Ableton Live, and this is what it sounds like.
They let the corniest shit get the most airplay. You know what I mean? The most unconscious shit get the most airplay. It's like, what the fuck is wrong with y'all? And then run up on me talking about keep it real. Don't run up on me say keep it real if you ain't supporting the real.
So I'm just going to put the appropriate part of the sample on the drop just to see how it sounds.
And then run up on me talking about. And then run up on me talking about.
What I'm going to do with the sample is just chop up the keep it real into 3 different syllables. So it goes keep it real and then just put them on beat. So I've decided that I'm going to get rid of this delay and just use the delay on a send and then automate the send instead.
You ain't supporting the real. Don't run up on me say keep it real if you ain't supporting the real.
So obviously when it comes to the frequency range, the percussion parts that I've added so far are kind of in the upper mid area, but I want to add something above that in the real top end, like 10 kilohertz. So I've just added these hi-hats. So take a listen to these hi-hats, and they're layered really quietly. Obviously they're sent to the room reverb like everything else, and they might sound very low in the mix and insignificant, but they do actually play a big part in the grand scheme of the frequency spectrum of the tune. If you want to learn how to make old school rave music, click this video on the left, and if you want to see my entire playlist of tutorials, here it is on the right. I'm DJ Graish. I'll see you in the next video.